As you may already know, I am a huge fan of the first two Streets of Rage games. The second one, actually, I probably consider it my favorite game on the Sega Genesis, but that third game, it always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. With Streets of Rage 3, they tried to build and add some depth to the story and gameplay. New attacks, multiple endings, dashing, rolling, 6-button controller support, hidden characters, cutscenes between stages, then top it off with somewhat improved visuals from the predecessor and new obstacles and enemies. Oh yeah, there's also this new character named Dr. Zan. He's this game's slow-moving powerhouse type character. He's a cybernetically enhanced scientist who has defected from the evil Mr. X's syndicate and now fights on your side. He has a long reach and some unique ranged attacks, but I much preferred Max from Streets of Rage 2. On paper, all that probably sounds like it'd be great, but in execution, to me, I think it falls kind of short. However, the game that we got as Streets of Rage 3 in the US and Europe and elsewhere is slightly different from the game that was released in Japan as Bare Knuckle 3. This here is actually a reproduction cart which has Bare Knuckle 3 translated to English, keeps everything the way it was in the Japanese game otherwise, and a lot of what you'll be seeing in gameplay footage comes from this version. The previous Streets of Rage games were fairly easy. You could bash through them with relative ease, but this one, not so much. This one was dramatically more difficult. Even compared to the Japanese counterpart, it is noticeably more difficult. My best guess is that they shifted the difficulty settings up a notch for the Western versions to make the game more than just a weekend rental. A few games from this time period did this. Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse is more difficult than Akumajo Densetsu, and Contra Hardcore is more difficult than its Japanese version. I'm sure there's other examples, but those are the ones to me that come to mind first. Another difference are all these little graphical changes. Some of them were censorship issues. A number of female characters had their sprites changed so they weren't so scantily clad. I find this amusing since the most notable of these changes were in the dominatrix characters who've been around since the first game, and their sprites weren't all that different from those in Streets of Rage 2. Another censorship issue would be Blaze's jump kick. It's just a small pixel difference, but it looks like there's a bit of a panty shot in Bare Knuckle 3. Guess that might have been a little too hot for Western audiences. One of the most notable changes that could be classified as censorship would be the removal of the level 1 mid-boss Ash, a flamboyant, leather-clad, homosexual stereotype character. I think the omission behind that one is pretty obvious, but the character can still be unlocked to be playable with cheat devices. Perhaps the most baffling of the visual changes would be the recolorization of the character sprites for 3 of the main characters. Axel, Blaze, and Skate were the same color schemes since the first game, so it made no sense really to change them. The story, which has the evil Mr. X trying to stage a nuclear war in the Japanese version, is merely trying to take over the city with android doubles in the Western version. While yes, there are android doppelgangers in the Japanese version, they weren't the focal point at all. The bombings were the focal point of the Japanese storyline, and in the Western, they were lessened in importance as well. I have to say that while I find the story of Bare Knuckle 3 a little more interesting, either way it seems rather contrived to me, and I much prefer the simpler bad guys did bad stuff, now let's stop them storylines of most beat-em-ups out there. While not as dramatic of a change, but a lot of the original voice effects by composer Yuzo Koshiro were changed as well. Most notably, the Grand Upper battle cry was replaced by one shouting Bare Knuckle, which really makes no sense in context, especially since in the Bare Knuckle 2 and 3, he yelled Grand Upper. Also, Axel's wearing gloves, so his knuckles aren't bare. I think that's about it for the regional differences, but in speaking of Yuzo Koshiro, he's back composing the music for this game, but the influences are a little bit different. It's still that techno kind of sound, but this one's more noise-based and a little bit more nastier kind of sounds, and it's nowhere as enjoyable to listen to than the music in the previous games. A lot of it just kind of sounds like generic Sega Genesis game music to me, and it is at best mediocre. As I said earlier in the video, this game has support for the 6-button controller, opening up more attack variety. You can play the game just fine with the 3-button pad as well, but it is easier to pull off some of the different special attacks with the 6. In the end, I just feel that the bar was set kinda high with Streets of Rage 2, And Streets of Rage 3, with all the innovations and new things that they were trying with it, just couldn't clear that hurdle. Don't get me wrong, it's a decent game. It is fun at times, but there's just certain things about it which I don't especially care for. That music is kind of annoying at times, and the difficulty spike is a little bit more than what you're used to compared to the previous Streets of Rage games. There are a lot of beat 'em ups in the 16-bit generation, and there's a lot of them that are better than this one. However, you can find this game extremely easily. Most of the compilations, which include Streets of Rage 1 and 2, will have this one as well. You can find it on a ton of downloading services. If you can get your hands on a copy of Bare Knuckle 3, whether you can read Japanese or get a translated version, however you so choose to do that, emulation, repro carts, I think some of the compilations do include translated versions of Bare Knuckle 3 on them. You can definitely check them out, and if you've never played the Streets of Rage series at all, you're really missing out. That's my opinion. Hope you've enjoyed this review. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care.